Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
We're studying Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 4, entitled Vidura Approaches Maitreya. We're on text 32. It's March 12th, 2023. Text 32, Chapter 4, Canto 3. Narayanam namaskritya naram chaivanottamam devim sarasvatim vyasam tato jayamudirayat. Before reciting the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the very means of conquest, one should first offer respectful obeisances unto the personality of Godhead Narayan, to Narayan Rishi, the supermost human being, unto Mother Sarasvati, the goddess of learning, and unto Srila Vyasadeva, the author. Nasta prayeshva bhadreshu nicham bhagavata sevaya bhagavat utama shloke bhaktir bhavati naishtiki. Text 32. Evam Triloka Guna Sandishta Shabda Yonina Padarya Shramam Asadya Harim Ije Samadina Evam Triloka Guna Sandishta Shabda Yonina Padarya Shramam Asadya Harim Ije Samadina Evam Triloka Guna Sandishta Shabda Yonina Padarya Shramam Asadya Harim Ije Samadina Evam Triloka Guna Sandishta Shabda Yonina Padarya Shramam Asadya Harim Ije Samadina
Evam Triloka Guna Sandishta
Sandishta Shabda Yonina
Padarya Shramam Asadya Harim Ije
Samadina. Would anyone online like to recite the verse?
Evam Triloka Guruna Sandista
Shabda Yonina
Adara Sharam Ashadye
Padarya Shramam Asadya
Harim Ija Samadhina
Harim Ije Samadina. We'll go to the word meanings. Evam, thus. Triloka, three worlds. Guruna, by the spiritual master. Sandishta, being perfectly taught. Shabda Yonina, by one who is the source of all Vedic knowledge. Padarya-shramam, in the pilgrimage site of Badarikashram. Asadya, reaching. Harim, unto the Lord. Ije, satisfied. Samadina, by trance. Translation. Shukadeva Goswami informed the king that Uddhava, being thus instructed by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the source of all Vedic knowledge and the spiritual master of the three worlds, reached the pilgrimage site of Badarik Ashram and engaged himself there in trance to satisfy the Lord. Purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Lord Sri Krishna is factually the spiritual master of the three worlds, and he is the original source of all Vedic knowledge. It is very difficult, however, to understand the personal feature of the absolute truth, even from the Vedas. His personal instructions are needed in order to understand the personality of Godhead as the supreme absolute truth. Bhagavad Gita is the evidence of such transcendental knowledge in gist. One cannot know the Supreme Lord unless one is graced by the Lord himself. Lord Krishna exhibited this specific mercy towards Arjuna and Uddhava while he was in the material world. Undoubtedly, Bhagavad Gita was spoken by the Lord on the battlefield of Kurukshetra just to encourage Arjuna to fight, and yet to complete the transcendental knowledge of Bhagavad Gita, the Lord instructed Uddhava. The Lord wanted Uddhava to fulfill his mission and disseminate knowledge, which he had not spoken even in Bhagavad Gita. Persons who are attached to the words of the Vedas may also know from this verse that the Lord is the source of all Vedic knowledge. One who is unable to understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead by going through the pages of the Vedas may take shelter of one of the Lord's devotees, such as Uddhava, in order to advance further in knowledge of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Brahma Samhita says that it is very difficult to understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead from the Vedas, but he is easily understood from a pure devotee like Uddhava. Taking mercy on the great sages who lived at Badarik Ashram, the Lord authorized Uddhava to speak on his behalf. Unless one has such authorization, one cannot understand or preach the devotional service of the Lord. While present on this earth, the Lord executed many uncommon activities, even traveling in space to bring down the Parijata from heaven and recovering the son of his teacher, Sandipani Muni, from the regions of death. Uddhava was certainly informed of the conditions of life on other planets, and all the sages were anxious to know of them, just as we are anxious to know about the planets in space. Uddhava was particularly deputed to carry a message to Badarik Ashram, not only to the sages of that place of pilgrimage, but also to the Narayan deities. Such a message must have been more confidential than the knowledge described in the pages of the Vedas. The Lord is undoubtedly the source of all knowledge, and the messages dispatched through Uddhava to Narayan and other sages were also part of the Vedic knowledge, but they were more confidential and could be sent or understood only through such a pure devotee as Uddhava. Since such confidential knowledge was known only to the Lord and Uddhava, it is said that Uddhava was as good as the Lord himself. Every living entity can, like Uddhava, also become a confidential messenger on the same level as the Lord, provided he becomes confidential himself by dint of loving devotional service. Such confidential knowledge is entrusted, as confirmed in Bhagavad Gita, only to pure devotees like Uddhava and Arjuna, and one has to learn the mystery through them and not otherwise. One cannot understand Bhagavad Gita or Srimad Bhagavatam without the help of such confidential devotees of the Lord. According to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, that confidential message must have concerned the mystery of his departure and the annihilation of his dynasty after the end of his appearance in the mundane world for 100 years. Everyone must have been very anxious to know about the mystery of the annihilation of the Yadu dynasty, and that message must have been explained by the Lord to Uddhava and dispatched to Badarik Ashram for the information of Narayan and other pure devotees of the Lord. Om Gana Timirandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Svayam Upakadamayam Tadati Sva Padantikam Bandeham Shri Guru Shri Utapada Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Rakna Tanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitan Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitam Cha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radhakanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurange Radhe Vrindavaneshware Vishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatayubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Vyeva Cha Patitanan Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Sarasvati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Desha Tarine Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd Canto, Chapter 4, Text 32. Evam Triloka Guna Sandishta Shabda Yonina Badarya Shramam Asadyari Mije Samadhina. Shukadev Goswami informed the king that Uddhava, being thus instructed by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the source of all Vedic knowledge and the spiritual master of the three worlds, reached the pilgrimage site of Badarik Ashram and engaged himself there in trance to satisfy the Lord. Okay, so, well, there are several points here in this, several important points related to the science of Bhakti Yoga here in this text and purport. One, as described in Bhagavad Gita, Vedeshcha saver aham eva vedyo Vedantakrit Veda Vide Vachaham. So Krishna is the compiler of the Vedas. You could say he's the transpersonal author of all the Vedas. Krishna is the goal of the Vedas. He's the source of the Vedas. He's the object. Okay, this is very important because we hear more and more as the generations go on. We hear a lot about the Vedas and yoga and dharma and karma. So Krishna is the goal and the source and the compiler. Important to understand because the Vedas are, they're like a desire tree. Nigama kalpatarora galitam palam sukhamukanam vita jave samyutam pibata bhagavatam rasamalayam more sika bhuvi bhavi. The Vedas, they're like a desire tree. You can get anything you want there. You can get heavenly planets. You can get great enjoyments in this world. You can get all sorts of knowledge. You can get knowledge about social structure, about astronomy and dance and art and military science. It's all there. And the goal of it all is devotional service to Sri Krishna. This is important. Yes. Fairly recently, I had communication with someone who was saying, yeah, she wants to study the Vedas that are not about Krishna. So I said, well, my understanding from the foremost Vedic scholar in Bhakti Yoga, Bhakti Yoga of the age Srila Prabhupada, because I understand the Vedas through Srila Prabhupada. It's not like no. So sometimes we hear him talking about all sorts of deviant Sometimes we'll hear Srila Prabhupada is not Shastra. I tell you, for me, Srila Prabhupada is Shastra. It's not like no. I studied all the Vedas and I decided. Prabhupada's actually correct most of the time. Yeah. No. So I know the Vedas through my current link to the Parampara Srila Prabhupada. So Prabhupada makes it clear. Bhagavad Gita makes it clear. Srimad Bhagavatam, this verse makes it clear. Because Krishna is the compiler of the Vedas. He's the goal, he's the source of the object. Okay. Now, at the same time, it could seem contradiction. And somehow it was just yesterday. or 2 days ago. Yeah, Molly and I you mentioned when Yogeshwar Prabhu was giving class, you mentioned the Atma Bhaktau, okay, the soul full of bhakti. So Advaitama Chuttamanadi Manatrupa Madhyam Purana Pusham Navayavanam Chapedeshu Dula Babadula Bamatma Bhakta Govinda Madi Pusham Tamma Bhajami. So what that verse says, spoken by Lord Brahma, Prabhupada references in it. Prabhupada said the Brahma Samhita says that it is very difficult to understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead from the Vedas, but he's easily understood from a pure devotee like Uddhava. So it can seem contradictory. Well, the Vedas are all about Krishna. I mean, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly. Bhagavatam is directly Bhagavatam. But if we approach the Vedas like we might approach, like, I'm going to study this physics book, I'm going to study this history book, I'm going to study this fiction novel, to see what I can get from it, then we won't get the essence. We won't get the essence of bhakti, to the personal form of Krishna. It will tend to miss it. It will remain this. It's like it's an open secret. Krishna describes in Bhagavad Gita, Raja Vidya Raja Guyam. Guyam means secret. This knowledge of Bhagavad Gita and its conclusion is very secret. What do you mean it's secret? Billions of people know Bhagavad Gita. Not very secret. Rajavidya Rajaguyam Pavichami Damutamam Prajakshvagamam Dhamyam Shushukam Karkamabhyam. It's an open secret. And so the secret's available to everyone, but one needs the key. And the key is Atma Bhakta. Atma Bhakta. That gets into the part of philosophy called epistemology. How do we know? How do we know? Okay, how does anyone know anything? So a point that we like to emphasize, just like if we want to know an inanimate object like this table or a rock, then the epistemology, the way to know, to study it, because if the object of study is inferior to the studier, then we can use what's called methods of modern empirical science. We can control it, we can analyze it, we can subject it to heat and cold and so many things. And okay, but like if the object of study is evolved, like say another human being, then we know that kind of that detached clinical analysis, and it's going to give us only very limited information. So a different epistemology is to gain someone's love and trust, then they choose to reveal themselves to us. So just like if our attempts to study the absolute, if we try to limit it to the methods for knowing that are applied only for that are effective only for inanimate objects, we're saying a priori that the absolute is inferior to me, which is essentially saying I am God. Okay, because nothing, even in principle, can be superior to me, and nothing even in principle, because I'm only using means of knowing that are effective for objects that are inferior to me. So to take that way of knowing a person, like a spirit soul having a human experience, gain love and trust through empathy, through understanding, through service, through revealing the heart confidentially, we gain love and trust, then we reveal ourselves more and more to each other. So applying that to God, applying that to Supreme Personality of Godhead, that's called bhakti. Serving Krishna with love and devotion. And then Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, reveals himself more and more intimately. So it's just, I'm thinking and reading this purport, as Prabhupada writes, it's very difficult, however, to understand the personal feature of the absolute truth, even from the Vedas. So in the 11th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, that's the universal form chapter. So at one point, Arjuna wants to see that kind of ferocious universal form, and then Arjuna sees it. He says, okay, well now let me, okay, that's enough. I'm scared, I'm intimidated. Then now let me see your four-handed form. And then the two-handed form. And then Krishna says, Sudardor Shamidam Upam. He says, this form, my two-handed form, standing here in your chariot, two-handed form, playing the flute, Yam Sham Sundarama Chigunasrupam. Krishna's Shamasundar, Krishna himself, whom the pure devotees see in their heart of hearts with the eyes of devotion tinged with the salve of love. He says this form is especially difficult to grasp, to understand. That's why in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Janma karma jame divyam evam yo veti tattvata tetvadayam pumnar jama neti mam neti surjana. Krishna says, one who really realizes the transcendental nature of my form, my activities, my disappearance, my pastimes, for such a person, there's no more material misery. Such a person has crossed the Viraj River. So we serve Krishna, then Krishna reveals himself to us. So that's why it's not like so it's useless to study the Vedas. No, we study the Vedas through studying Srila Prabhupada's books, hearing his lectures, reading his letters, like that, following his instructions. We're studying the Vedas through the pure devotee of Krishna, And we endeavor, just like we endeavor to chant, not just, actually I had a coaching session just yesterday. I conducted a session. And someone who's been chanting for 22 years, chanting japa, which she said she really wanted to focus in the session on, like she said, I've been chanting for 22 years, like every day. But she said, but now I really want to do bhakti. So she understand. But like she was saying, I chant, but I'm just realizing I'm not really doing bhakti, I'm just chanting. So she really wants to chant with at least an intention, with devotion to serve Krishna. The way she termed it, this was her language. She said, she doesn't want to live, let's say her name is Mary. Her name's not Mary, using a confidential name. But she said, she said, I don't want to be Mary-centered anymore. I want to be truly Krishna-centered. And of course, chanting for 20 years has brought her to that point to really want bhakti. Okay, so it was an enlivening session for me, and focus there. So similarly, we read Prabhupada's books, and we chant. We read Prabhupada's books, and we want to read it with a spirit of devotion, with the spirit, and then we're living that Atma Bhakta verse, Vedeshu Durlabham Durlabham Atma Bhakta. Otherwise, Durlabham, right? Otherwise, it's very difficult, even through study the Vedas from a jnani, from an intellectual point of view. We'll get some, because we're giving some attention to Vyasadev's words, but progress will be very slow. So, okay. So Prabhupada's emphasizing Sri Krishna, he spoke Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna. So that makes Arjuna a bona fide spiritual master. And Sri Krishna speaks to Uddhava. Well, we're getting a glimpse here, actually. So just like Bhagavad Gita is the Arjuna Gita. And so in the 11th canto Srimad Bhagavatam, there's 23 chapters Krishna speaks to Uddhava Gita. Okay. And so it's indicated here in this section of Bhagavatam, and the 11th canto is quite extensive, quite extensive. I'll go on a bit of a tangent. So sometimes, let's see, it can be like, because sometimes I've heard, oh yeah, you should read the 11th canto. You should read, and so of course, Srila Prabhupada gave us purports through 10th canto, chapter 13. There are 90 chapters in 10th canto. Anyhow, the key thing is it's not really read this or read that. The key thing is read Prabhupada's books. And whatever whether it's Krishna book, Bhagavad Gita, first canto, second canto, and again, as we like to emphasize, if we do go to other things, whether in the Vedas or any sort of literature, we want to be processing them, seeing them, realizing them through the pure lenses of Srila Prabhupada's books. Okay, so Srila Prabhupada, talking about Krishna spoke to Arjuna, Krishna spoke to Uddhava. That makes them bona fide spiritual masters because they're hearing receptively. Tad vidi pranipatena prapashnena seva upatekshanti deganam ganinas tatvidarshina. That verse from Bhagavad Gita says, just try to learn the truth by approaching a bona fide spiritual master. Render service unto the bona fide spiritual master, inquire from the bona fide spiritual master. Such a realized soul can impart truth to you, can impart diksha, upadekshanti teganam ganinas tatvidarshina. So this is another key point in this verse and purport, the current link principle, right? Current link means the pure devotee of Krishna, from whom we most directly and primarily receive divya gyan, diksha, divya gyan, transformational, transcendental knowledge. So we're very fortunate that we have Srila Prabhupada to serve that role in our life to whatever extent we want to give ourselves. We qualify ourselves to receive transformational, transcendental knowledge. We qualify ourselves to the extent that we serve humbly, that we engage in bhakti humbly and with sincerity. Then our hearts naturally practically automatically gets cleansed. And that's why also a point you've probably heard me make, because there are certainly some major movements to try to, well, unfortunately they're pretty successful, to try to establish that Srila Prabhupada's not available to be in that role. Even though in those same places where they're saying that, every morning they sing Divyagan, they sing to Prabhupada, Divyagan Ride Prokashito, which means you fill our heart with transcendental knowledge. But then they'll try to stop. Prabhupada's not available to directly, personally give transcendental knowledge. So of course, this Divyagan, this process of bhakti, process of diksha, bani, transcendental sound vibration, it's spiritual, which means by definition, it's not dependent on anything material or physical. So Srila Prabhupada's fully present, fully alive, fully current, and to whatever extent we want to take advantage, and I say that in a good sense, to take advantage of Prabhupada's presence to be a transparent via medium for Sri Krishna. And so giving us Krishna, the supreme personality of Godhead, which is the ultimate in realization of the absolute, the most Vedanti tat vavidas tat famyajganaman vayam brahmeti paramatmeti bhagavaniti shabdyate. Learned transcendentalists realize the absolute truth. Learned transcendentalists refer to this absolute truth in three phases: Brahmagyoti, Paramatma, which is the Lord in the heart, and then Sri Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And so, yes, so it's like yesterday, Melanie, in your class, you were talking about like Sattva, Brahman, because like the ideas of a Brahman is Brahman realized, complete Sattva. You're talking about, Prabhupada gave us the elevator. Prabhupada would use that analogy. So bhakti is the elevator. So like, our process is not so much to to go through the stages of higher modes to come to Brahman realization and then realize God in the heart like the yogis and then come to devotional service after many millions of lifetimes. We're just gone directly to bhakti. Now, a devotee who does come to bhakti realization, personal service to the personality of Godhead, which satisfies the soul, yayatma suprasidati, a devotee does have realization of Brahman. They're just not particularly interesting for them. Just this morning, before I drove here to Malini's ashram, Bhakti Yoga retreat, I read some Bhagavatam in my personal reading. Actually, I'm on the final chapter of the 9th canto, 24th chapter. And the chapter is entitled Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Because after this chapter, we go into the 10th canto. 10th canto is all about the Samam Bonam, Sri Krishna. So the 9th canto in this part, 9th canto is wild and far out in so many ways. But in this part, there's kind of lots of genealogy, and it can become like just reading names. At the same time, I'm getting a feel, just like it's like a crescendo. It's a crescendo because all these names and all the history and the genealogy and the generations, it's leading up really to this chapter, the 24th chapter of the 9th canto. And then right towards the end of this chapter, 24th chapter of the 9th canto. Yeah. Shukadeva Goswami is speaking to Maharaj Pariksha. Just like this verse we're reading today, it's really spoken by Sri Sutta Goswami about Shukadeva Goswami speaking to Uddhava. So in that 9th chapter, there's one verse that has a sentence. One who sees Lord Krishna sees a festival. So we're all looking for festivals. So we're all looking for color and personality and aliveness and vibrance. So one who sees Lord Krishna sees a festival. And this is just like a crescendo of verses leading up to the beginning of the 10th canto, which is all about, like, it's 90 chapters on the pastimes of Lord Krishna. So one who sees Lord Krishna sees a festival. So that's just like, it's very personal and rich and engages the senses. William Blake, the poet William Blake, I think he was American, maybe British, anyhow, English speaking. William Blake wrote, God appears and God is light to those poor souls who dwell in night, but does a human form display to those who dwell in times of day. So Blake had some realization there, because like it's unpredictable where he's going. God appeared and God is light. Oh, God is light. Let's celebrate that. But he goes, no, to those poor souls who dwell in night. It's like that, the impersonalization is just right? Because it's lacking the color, it's lacking the vibrancy, the spiritual potency, the eternal blissful relationship, but does a human form display. So a human form display doesn't mean he's human, doesn't mean Krishna's human, but we would see it as a human-like form. Actually, our form is Krishna-like, but we would see it as a human-like form, but does a human form display to those who dwell in times of day. So Srila Prabhupada's giving us this most intimate knowledge, and we qualify ourselves to receive it through sincere, humble bhakti, sincere, humble devotion. And then, okay, so then Uddhava, and this is, I don't have much understanding of this, but so Prabhupada says in the purport, Uddhava was particularly deputed to carry a message to Badarik Ashram, not only to the sages of that place of pilgrimage, but also to the Narayan deities. Such a message must have been more confidential than the knowledge described in the pages of the Vedas. So on Krishna's instruction, Uddhava, who's filled with Krishna consciousness, actual prema, love for Krishna, he's going to Badarik Ashram in the north in order to share the knowledge with Krishna. It's a little, because don't ask me too much about that one, but he's yeah. So part of Uddhava's preaching, sharing mission is to give the knowledge to Narayan, who's an incarnation of Krishna. and other sages there. So again, Narayan also, that's mostly, we hear about Narayan in first canto, second canto, fourth canto, mostly 11th canto, and like that. So the Narayan avatar is described also in the Bhagavatam. But anyhow, the principle here, we can follow Uddhava and Prabhupada. The principle is through sadhana bhakti, fill ourselves up with Krishna consciousness, with the joy of true bhakti yoga, and share. Fill it up, and so even Uddhava is doing that. Okay, I say even because just like Srila Prabhupada, he didn't need to leave Vrindavan, but he wanted to share. He wanted to share. In that coaching session yesterday, this woman also has been chanting, and she wants to really do, and she's feeling quite isolated, and then she know again, it came from her, like, well, she wants to share, and she was thinking, so she has like a sister who visits with her children, and it's usually a pretty mundane visit. But she says, okay, I'm gonna bake prasadam cookies and distribute them. Okay, so prasadam through Bhagavad Gita philosophy, through kirtan, different ways to share. So this goes hand in hand, that the more we're intentional to share, the more we want to know and understand and realize. And the more that we practice our personal sadhana, we experience more joy. And it's like, I want to share this. It's just very natural. And we become dear to Prabhupada, dear to Krishna. Right? Srila Prabhupada, he's completely Atmarama, self-satisfied. And that's the thing with Krishna being the goal of all the Vedas. This is a part, we can say so many verses that illustrate that. I said a few. Vedeshta Saveraham Vedio Vedantakrit Veda Vede Bacham. That's from Bhagavad Gita 15th chapter. But if we just look at the examples, the heroes of Bhagavatam, Sukta Goswami, Shukadev Goswami, Vyasadeva, Vidura, Uddhava, etc., etc. What are they doing with their lives? Just complete dedication, pure devotion to Sri Krishna. So Srila Prabhupada, because following in the line of Prahlad Maharaj, Prabhupada, out of compassion, he is fine on his own there in Vrindavan, but in 1965 he left so that here in Florida and Atlanta and Europe, and throughout the world, so that we can have this joy of Krishna consciousness and come out of the misery of material existence. There's a verse Prabhupada quotes a lot from Prahlad Maharaj, Naivodvija Paradaratya Vaitaranyash. Vaitaranya is a name for the Viraj River between the material and spiritual realms. And Prahlad Maharaj is saying, he said, I really have no worries about like, how am I going to cross the Viraj River? I have no worries because I'm serving you, Lord Nrsingadev, Namaste, Narashringaya, Nrsingamedim, Sharanam Prapade. I have no worries. But he says, but still I'm in anxiety, transcendental anxiety, Tvatvirya, Gayana, Maham Vita Magna Chitta Soche. But he says, I'm lamenting, I'm lamenting, I'm in anxiety, Soche Tata. Vimukha Chaitana Indriyarta Maya Sukhaya Paramudva Hato Vimukha. He says because there's all these like fools, and I care about them, that they're Maya Sukhaya, they're chasing after a phantasmagoria, they're chasing after the illusion of happiness, and they're suffering so much. So I don't want to be liberated until they're liberated. And of course, Prahlad Maharaj, who has that view, he's naturally already liberated from material miseries, but he's experiencing transcendental anxiety. And that same transcendental anxiety, that's why Prabhupada at the age of 70 gets on the Jaladuta to give this liberating knowledge and process to us. And by engaging in this sharing, cultivating Krishna conscious sharing, and that's like, you know, we all get to like find our growth edge in that, you know, like cultivating and sharing, and we're guided in finding our balanced, dynamic growth edge by Srila Prabhupada. You know, by he gives us guidelines. You know, he gives us guidelines, so it can be in balance. Like there's one leading devotee back in Prabhupada's movement back in the 70s. Shortly after Prabhupada left, I heard from others that he was saying, like, because he was like distributing a lot of books and he was a big manager and like that. And like they were noticing like he wasn't chanting rounds. But at one point he said, Arjuna didn't chant rounds. He was fighting with his bow and arrow. He was on the battlefield like that. After a short time, okay, he left the practice. From what I understand, he's come back a few decades later. Krishna consciousness is very attractive. You know, at the same time, our process in following Srila Prabhupada, following Sri Uddhava, it's our process for most all of us, if not all of us. It's not like I'll chant 172 rounds per day, and or I'll just read. No, it's about we cultivate and we share. We cultivate and we share. Prabhupada recommended, again, if we commit to 1 round per day, and that's recommended, like it, rather than I chanted this much, and then I didn't chant for a few months, but I chanted 40 rounds one day. It's recommended, commit to something. Maybe it's 1 round a day, 2 rounds a day. Commit to something and do that without fail for the rest of your life. And then we can build on that. And same with reading Prabhupada's books, commit to something. Maybe it's a weekly commitment. And so Prabhupada recommended, like, if we really want to like make progress each day out of the material ocean, he recommended 16 rounds per day. But that's not meant to mean like, so it's like 16 rounds or bust, all or nothing. No, we wherever we're at, we can say, okay, let me increase that and share. And the more we share, the more we want to fill ourselves up with Krishna consciousness and continue to share and experience the joy and the bliss. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Yaidam paramam guyam madbhakteshvavidasyati bhakti maya pram kritva mamadeshasya samshaya nacha tasman manusheshu kaschid me priyakritama bhavitaj nacha me tasmad anya priyataro bhuvi. Krishna says, one who shares Bhagavad Gita, one who shares this knowledge, which can be done in different, it can be done in a formal class, like we're having a Bhagavatam class. It can be done when we're a brief interaction at the post office where we support someone in awakening to who they really are and questioning what's truth and what's reality. Because Krishna, one who shares this, then naturally they'll get inspired to do more devotional service, and they're on their path back home, back to Godhead. And Krishna says, such one who shares this wisdom is my most dear servant, my most dear servant. And Krishna says, there will never be one more dear than me. So if our goal in life, to whatever our goal in life is to become dear to Krishna, Krishna tells us how to do it. Cultivate bhakti, cultivate Krishna consciousness, share with others in the mood, in the line, and under the guidance of our pure devotee of Krishna, Srila Prabhupada. I'll read this verse again. This is Canto 3, Chapter 4, Text 32, Srimad Bhagavatam. Evam tri loka guna sandishta shabda yonina Badaryashramam asadya harim ije samadhina. Shukadeva Goswami informed the king that Uddhava, being thus instructed by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the source of all Vedic knowledge and the spiritual master of the 3 worlds, reached the pilgrimage site of Badarika Ashram and engaged himself there in trance to satisfy the Lord. Hare Krishna, thanks for your attention. Thanks for your presence. I welcome at this time if anyone would like to share any comments or ask any questions.
I have a
Malini,
question.
sure.
You will not like it, but
Okay.
at the end of the purport, Srila Prabhupada said, everyone must have been very anxious to know about the mystery of the annihilation of the Yadu dynasty.
Yeah.
And that message must have been explained by the Lord to Uddhava and dispatched to Badarika Ashram for the information of Narayan and other pure devotees of the Lord. So when I read that, I'm thinking, wow, Srila Prabhupada doesn't seem to know that this knowledge is so confidential that like Srila Prabhupada must have been he's not sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That message must have been explained, by the Lord to Dava.
Okay. Yeah,
So there is those sentences at the end of the purport that indicate that Prabhupada is conjecturing.
Oh, that's conjecturing. Yes. So okay. Well, I don't have much memory of what specifically, I have some memory of what specifically is in the Uddhava Gita section of the Bhagavatam, 11th canto, those 23 chapters. We know for sure earlier in these talks between Vidura and Uddhava, there's a lot about the disappearance of Krishna, of the Yadu dynasty. Yeah, and so so Uddhava got that from Krishna. So it's clear, but so then twice Prabhupada uses the term must have been. He used that twice. Okay, right. So we can see that maybe Prabhupada, maybe there's some uncertainty, but it could be like a humble way of speaking. It could be a humble way of speaking. Okay, it could be I'm doing permissible conjecture. Prabhupada does that sometimes. Sometimes Prabhupada will say, and such is supposed to be the what one who practices that is supposed to be. And so Prabhupada, like sometimes he can be very bold with his language and sometimes tentative out of humility. It could be that, because like we can see earlier in this purport, he's quoting Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, who's a great commentator.
Yeah.
And there again, Prabhupada uses must have. So maybe because Srila Prabhupada, he's referencing Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, then he's simply using the language that Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is using. Doesn't necessarily mean that Prabhupada's not clear in realization, but it's kind of like a humble way of representing previous acharyas and doesn't want to use language that's more conclusive than Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, because it seemed Prabhupada's paraphrasing Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur in this part of the purport.
I noticed that too.
Yeah.
So that Prabhupada will want to keep the same mood.
Yeah, that's my guess.
Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is tentative, and Srila Prabhupada wants to be tentative, and if we were to speak, we will want to be tentative.
Yeah. Right. Because it's sometimes the acharyas, it's just like, yeah, here's a perspective, and here's a perspective. And perhaps this is what's happening. So sometimes the acharyas can be like that. And so I think Prabhupada's, he doesn't want to, he's representing Vishwanath Chakravarti or in that tentativeness. That's what I understand. Thank you. Any questions or comments from anyone online? Anything else?
Hare Krishna.
Anastasia,
Yes, good morning.
good morning.
I know when I first started studying the Bhagavad Gita, I had some personal, I'll call it distress, over words such as absolute truth and supreme absolute truth. And so I know this paragraph in the first purport the Prabhupada gave us says, how difficult it is to understand
Yeah.
without knowing this directly from the Lord himself. So it kind of gave me some peace, because it is very difficult.
Yeah.
And I like when you shared making a commitment, whether it's chanting or reading Prabhupada's books, and it feels in alignment that that I cannot know the Supreme Lord unless I have my spiritual master Prabhupada to help me understand by reading this absolute knowledge, this perfect and complete knowledge. And so I was just appreciating being with you this morning in class, and having a little deja vu one morning when I was at Melanie's and I was very distressed, and I followed you out to your car, and it was already over and you needed to go. And I still remember clearly, I was like, but what is absolute truth? and you let me just be with it. You just let me be with my question. And so it was painful, and it was difficult. And it was also, it's my personal growth of learning, and having a relationship with both Prabhupada and with Krishna. So yeah, I was just having a little deja vu this morning, and appreciating class. So thank you so much, dear Govinda.
Thank you, Mother Anastasia. I appreciate all facets of what you're sharing there. So this is, yeah, I like how you said that. It's actually encouraging. It can give a sense of relief. Prabhupada writes, it is very difficult, however, to understand the personal feature of the absolute truth, even from the Vedas. So I'm not the only one who's finding this difficult. Well, okay. Yeah, it's very difficult. So that's like, that's encouraging. I can see like, so it's natural to struggle, and encouraging that, okay, because as the purple goes on, oh yeah, so by humbly serving Prabhupada and not depending on my own mental wrangling, like depending on Prabhupada, taking shelter in Prabhupada, okay, then gradually I do realize the absolute truth more and more fully. That's the process. An absolute, a way I've come to more and more understand and communicate absolute truth. I say that which is true in all time and space. And so like we start the Bhagavatam, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. The translation given in that first verse of Bhagavatam, where that line appears. O my Lord, Sri Krishna, son of Vasudeva, O all-pervading personality of Godhead, I offer my respectful obeisances unto you. So Vasudeva is a name for Krishna, which means the son of Vasudeva. Vasudeva, the father of Krishna, also represents, and he provides the space for Krishna's appearance, transcendence. So Krishna, the all-pervading personality of Godhead, which means Sri Krishna exists in his fullness. In the heart of the fundamental unit of matter, in the heart of all living entities. So Sri Krishna is everywhere. Sri Krishna, the personality of God, it is the substratum of all existence. Even we can think like, okay, there's the body, but then more subtle, there's the mind, but then more subtle, there's the soul. So the soul is actually at the very foundation of the subtle and gross material matter. But even more foundational than the soul rests on the super soul. But the super soul rests on Krishna. So Krishna is the foundation of all existence, all time, all existence, material and spiritual. So so that's what it means to realize the absolute. And there are other aspects of the absolute supersoul, the great white light, or the Brahma-Jyoti, and the Paramatma, the supersoul. But the source, the substratum of it all is Sri Krishna dancing with the gopis, playing the flute. So just thought to share that's a way, I'm coming to, some understanding of absolute.
Thank you so much, Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Anasuya. Hare Krishna. Srimad Bhagavatam ki. Oh, I see Kim has her hand up.
I'm sorry, I was so slow. I was going to say I appreciated one of the last things you were talking about with how important it is to share and how dear that is to Krishna if you share this philosophy with others. And, I find that in other religions too, where they talk about that. And I'd like to see that uniformity of how important that is, and just to try to remember how important it is, because there's always a chance or a time during the day you can put it into a conversation and share it in the most small ways, and if you have that in your mind that it's important, you can do that, if you don't forget that that's important to Krishna anyway, and to everyone. So I commented on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Thanks for sharing that. And of course, I like the term share because, Prabhupada used the word preach, and that's wonderful term. Is preach has become, it has like different connotations because, preach, some will see it like kind of like, people are so insecure that I'm preaching because I need you to be like me. And if you have any understanding, if you have any belief different than mine, then I'll get really angry in the name of God, and the whole thing, like that. But this is, like just like a child has like a wonderful piece of candy, I want to share it, like that. And yeah. So it's just like it's natural to share. We got something good, natural to share. Thanks for highlighting that. Thank you, Kim. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.